Okay, this story, early in Genesis, begins the Garden of Eden, but it doesn't end there. I asked the question, where is Eden? Where's Eden? Where do you think Eden is? Well, I have this little story that I read. A student asked that question of his seminary professor, who was Dr. Carlisle Marney. He was a famous preacher and seminary professor. And where is Eden? And Dr. Marney replied, 215 South Elm Street, Knoxville, Tennessee.
Oh.
The student said, oh, no, that can't be right. I think it's over in the Middle East somewhere, isn't it? And Carlisle Marney said, well, you couldn't prove it by me because it was there on Elm Street when I was a boy that I stole a quarter out of my mother's purse and went down to the store and bought candy with it and ate the candy. And then I was so ashamed of what I had done that I came back home and hid in the closet. And it was there that my mother found me, and she asked, why are you hiding? What have you done? I don't know if any of us can relate to that story or not. Maybe if you can remember that far back, or maybe it wasn't so far back, depending on your age. We've had those experiences where we have done something that we knew deep down inside of ourselves was wrong. And maybe we've been challenged about that. And maybe an authority figure, such as a parent, asked us what we had done. And the guilt and the shame and the fear kind of overwhelmed us and set in on us. And we heard those words, why are you hiding? What have you done? This account of human disobedience begins very early in the biblical story. I mean, we're only in the 3rd chapter of Genesis. But it seems that that's appropriate because disobedience begins very early in our lives. And you don't remember, and I don't remember, the first time we were disobedient. That's just how we are. That is a part of our nature. Have you ever been around a 2-year-old? You've heard of the terrible twos? That's a real thing, you know? And actually, I guess we can excuse 2-year-olds or children, young children going through that stage that some seems to go through more than others. We can excuse them a bit because they really are still in the age of innocence, but they just have this need to assert their independence. And it seems to be an essential part of identity formation, which is okay. But there need to be limits. And as we grow older, it's important that we learn that we really are not the center of the universe, even though at age 2 we may have thought we were. The old Burger King commercial, you can have it your way, you know, we just can't. We just can't always have it our way, whether we want to or not. Sooner we learn that, the better off we are. So in our search of where we fit into this world that is filled with other human beings and their needs and their desires, we find that we also encounter a supreme being, God, who has created us, but who has also set boundaries for us. God put the tree of knowledge, that knowledge of good and evil, in the garden. And He established a law, and that is, stay away from that tree. You've got all these other trees in the whole garden that you can eat from. Just don't eat from that tree. But you know, there's just something innate in our nature that we rebel against any law. If God hadn't said that, maybe they would have never eaten from that tree anyway. But just the fact that they knew they weren't supposed to eat from that tree. And the serpent suddenly suggests, well, you know, if you eat from that tree, you're going to be like God. You're going to know good from evil. You're going to be equal with God. You're going to have superior knowledge. And so there is the heart of our rebellion, our dilemma. Rather than being content to let God be the creator and we simply be his creation and be subservient to him, we want to be equal to him. And maybe we want to be independent of him. But we just want to do it our way, not have anyone else tell us how to do it or not do it. So this first couple, as we know, they ate the fruit of the tree and they lost their innocence. They did, in fact, gain that knowledge of good and evil, as God had said. But the knowledge they gained was that they were naked. And that their sin had been exposed. They were exposed. They were ashamed. And so they tried to hide. And then in the evening, here comes God walking through the garden in the cool of the evening. I love that, just that image of God enjoying his creation, taking a little evening walk, a little stroll through his garden in the evening breeze. And he doesn't see his children here. And he calls out, "Why are you hiding? Where are you? What have you done?" And they know that they are exposed, and their sin is exposed, and they cannot hide from God. And so then come consequences, right? Everybody in school, students hear that word, consequences. There are always consequences. And first God says in verse 22, well, now they've eaten from this tree, and so now they know good and evil. And the next thing might be that they're going to eat from the tree of life, and if they do that, they're going to live forever, and we can't have that. So God had no choice but to drive them out of the garden, and he set up a flaming sword to guard the way to the tree of life. Incidentally, that tree of life, we come across that again, but not for a long time. In the very last chapter of the Bible, Revelation 22, in the New Jerusalem, that tree of life with fruit for each of the months and leaves for the healing of the nations, we hear reference to that tree. And what a powerful image of the future when God and humans will come full circle and the faithful will dwell again in God's garden, in the new heaven and the new earth. That's how the Bible ends. That's how this story ends. We begin with that tree. We end with the tree of life. So, here we are, dealing with consequences. And you've heard about what happened to Adam and Eve. And we're still dealing with those consequences. Serpents or snakes are still pretty much despised and feared and shunned by most people. Few people like snakes. Most of us don't. Women are still having pain in childbirth. And we all are still earning our living by the sweat of our brow. Whether that's literally the sweat of our brow or figuratively, we're all sweating it out and working to earn our living. But this is not the only story of human disobedience and consequences, because as we follow Genesis, and these are the daily readings that we had for the disciple class, most of these come from Genesis. We move on to the very next chapter, chapter 4, and Adam and Eve have two sons, Cain and Abel. Cain becomes angry when God accepts his brother's offering and doesn't accept his. And we know that anger can have all kinds of consequences. It can lead to all kinds of sin, violence, and God tried to warn him. God said, look out, Cain, sin is lurking or crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. And again, we have that image of sin I always think of a lion or some big beast of prey kind of hiding behind the door, ready to pounce on us and do us in, devour us. Your anger will devour you. And yes, anger can devour us. Have you ever been so angry that you felt like you were totally out of control? And it's frightening. We can scare ourselves just by being that angry and saying, wow, I just didn't know I had that much emotion in me. Not a good thing. And so God told Cain, you can master it. Cain didn't listen. And I was reminded of 1 Corinthians 10:13, where Paul is writing about self-control. And Paul says, God won't let you be tested or tempted beyond your power to resist, beyond your strength. But with the testing, he will provide a way out. You will be tested, you will be tempted, but if you're faithful, God will provide a way out. You can master any temptation. Cain didn't listen. And he let his anger consume him, and he went out and killed his brother. Just as his parents had received consequences, so did he, and so do we. And God made him a fugitive and a wanderer over the earth. And yet God didn't completely cast him aside, but God protected him. God put a mark on Cain. And he also protected and provided for Adam and Eve in their new home, which was not in the garden. It was east of Eden, beyond the garden, but God still cared for them. God never deserts us. And so there's more readings. As we go through Genesis, then we get to chapter 6 through 9, and we find that humanity had gotten just about totally rotten. Just bad. People were just bad. God saw their wickedness, and that, quote, every inclination of the thoughts of their heart was only toward evil. And he was about to just end it all, just destroy everybody. It's the only solution God could think of. Maybe start over. And then he remembered Noah. Well, there is one righteous person left in the world, blameless in his generation. So God preserved humankind through Noah and his family, the big flood, the ark, we know that story. But once again, there were major consequences to human sin. God preserved his people and left us with that promise of the rainbow. And then a final reading from Genesis, we get to chapter 11, and you have the story of the Tower of Babel, where again it's the human desire to make a name for ourselves that get people into trouble. Human pride, the desire to make a name for ourselves. The human tendency toward disobedience, even toward arrogance. I guess arrogance is a word. The book also used the term hubris. That's kind of a different word. Don't use that one too often. But actually that is a term that the ancient Greeks used when they wrote about a level of pride that offended even the gods and would lead to a person's destruction. Hubris. Our pride that is so offensive that even God is offended. Okay, so the evidence for human sin certainly is well documented, and that's just in the first 11 chapters of Genesis. We had other scriptures we don't have time to go into today. David's sin with Bathsheba and confrontation by Nathan the prophet. Israel's sin, the sin of the whole nation in turning away from God. They're being punished and being overthrown. The northern kingdom by Assyria, southern kingdom by Babylon. The prophets talking till they were blue in the face, but people just rejecting God. Then eventually coming back. Consequences they endured. Well, it's a long, long story. Then we get to the New Testament, and we see that sin can still be a problem.
Yes.
Paul, here in Romans, he's writing this letter to Romans in the 3rd chapter, first chapter, he's condemning the sins of the Gentiles, talking about how evil these people are. And you know that the people in church are saying, all right, yeah, I knew those people are bad. But then he gets to chapter 3 and he says, is there no one who is righteous? No, not one. He's quoting Psalm 14 there. We're all caught up in this web of what some call original sin. You know, the sin of the original people, Adam and Eve, is still with us. It's still with us. Another name, I like the term universal sin better, frankly, because I don't want to blame Adam and Eve for everything, but it's obvious that sin is universal. It is a part of our nature. It is a part of our world. It is everywhere. It is. It's just out there, and it's in here as well. So, Paul acknowledges that even he can't escape the web. That's what amazes me so much. And in Romans 7, this litany that we used, he's been, prior to this, he's been explaining the value of the law or rules, the Jewish law. He's saying it does have some value because it shows us what's wrong, that we shouldn't do. It sets boundaries. And then we know when we're out of bounds. And so the law is good. But, he says, there's still something in us that as soon as we see that boundary, that line in the sand, then there's something in us that just makes us want to step over it. And I remember my seminary New Testament professor, Grady Snyder, used the garbage illustration. He said at his house, his job was to take out the garbage. Take out the trash. You know, he knew that. His wife knew that. And he usually did it, but sometimes he'd forget or be late, and his wife would say, Grady, you need to take out the garbage. And as soon as she would say that, everything within him just rebelled, and he didn't want to take out the garbage. Whereas if he had thought of it, he'd be glad to do it. And that's how we are. When somebody lays down the law, there's something within us that rebels against that. Maybe you can't identify with that. I sure can. But that's where Paul's coming from, and I suspect most of us as well. They're in from Romans 7, the words from our litany, he says, I don't understand myself. I want to do good, but then I go and do the things I despise. I don't understand that. I delight in God's commands, but obviously not all of me, not all parts of me join in that delight. Parts of me covertly rebel. And just when I least suspect it, they take charge. You know, I'm surprised myself at my own rebellion. I've tried everything and nothing helps. I'm at the end of my rope. Is there no one who can do anything for me? Maybe we've been there. Maybe we are there. Suspect we all have been. Maybe are and could testify. But the good news is Paul doesn't stop there, and neither do we need to stop there, because Paul knows the answer to that dilemma, his dilemma, our dilemma. See, as he's writing this, he's kind of been setting us up, anticipating the answer, because yes, there is that antidote to our sin, to our pride, to our waywardness, to our inability to do the things that we know are right and to just do the wrong thing instead. Because in the next verse, 7:25, he says, the answer, thank God, is that Jesus Christ can and does. He is the one who acted to set things right in this life of contradictions, where I want to serve God with all of my heart and mind, but am pulled by the influence of sin to do something different, says Paul. Jesus Christ can and does get us straight. Amen. And that's certainly the good news in all of this. And our focus today in the disciple class is this message from Genesis about the origins of sin and disobedience and the power, pervasiveness of sin from the very beginning of human existence. and from the beginning of our individual existence. But as people of the Bible, and people especially of the New Testament, as disciples of Jesus Christ, we know where the answer is. We have heard the good news.
Mm-hmm.
He is the antidote to our sin.
Yes.
We know this story of God's great love for us, that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him, in spite of the continuing influence of sin in our daily lives, may not perish, but may have eternal life with Him, as that has been made available to us through Jesus, through His life, through His death on the cross, through His resurrection.
Yes.
And that's good news.
Oh,
Even a message about our sinfulness and waywardness ends with good news if we accept that good news, if we accept the grace of God that we have through Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Yes.